Well, hello there, and welcome again to another edition of the Overcomer blog. Hey, little question for you today. 40% of U.S. marriages end in divorce. Why do you suppose that is? That's a painful process. Well, this is Dr. John Hawkins, Sr., and again, I'm coming here from the offices of Gateway Counseling Center, Boynton Beach, Florida, and hopefully we'll cover some things today that will be helpful to you or helpful for your marriage. So back to the question that I asked. Why is that rate so high? Some people thought it was maybe higher, but it's higher than it ought to be. How can we help more people be happy? Because surveys show there's a lot of positive things about marriage as far as people's health and living longer. And remember one survey, people 25 to 55, talking about, they're twice as likely to report their life being, very happy in marriage. So, but all those positive things and marriage lasting, it's endured, through the ages here. How do you have a happy marriage? And we bring that divorce rate down. Well, I can tell you one reason why people end up not being happy and the marriage is not lasting. We could probably think of a number of them, but one is what I call 7 marriage myths. And people who believe these myths and actually live them and function that way in their marriage, they're going to find out things don't turn out that well in the marriage. And so I'm going to look at those things. This is going to be a 2-part series here because I can't get it all into one. So let's look at least 3 of those myths today on this segment of our broadcast. Number 1 is the myth that love should be enough. People say, well, love should be enough. That should conquer everything. But the reality is sometimes love isn't enough. Maybe your parents said to you, hey, you can't live on love. You can't pay the bills on love. But at least what we call human love is not enough to go the distance. That I mean, keep a marriage solid for a lifetime. Now, when I talk about human love, I'm talking primarily today in our culture, we define love as a feeling. It's kind of an old thing that, boy meets girl in the movies and they overcome adversity and they end up together and ride off happily into the sunset and just live happily ever after. But that's kind of a myth, in other words, it doesn't happen that way. The problem with feelings, when you define love through feelings are fickle, they change. They go up and down, they go all over the place. Kind of depends on how people are talking to me, how they're treating me, things like that. If you think about, well, how do we fall in love? Well, there's usually some kind of physical attraction. And then, it's how's that person talk to me? How do they treat me? How do I, think about them? It's all that stuff going on in my head then produces these feelings that we think of as being in love. But the other part too is my brain template. In other words, early on in my life, my primary caregivers, how they love me, how they take care of me, that starts to form a template of my idea of what love is. Now, those caregivers, they can be good or they can be, bad. But either way, I'm going to form this template, and that's what's going to be familiar to me. And my brain loves the familiar. It's comfortable to me. Even if it's not good, even if that template is wrong or off base, I will tend to get attracted to somebody that aligns with that template. Now, a lot of times that's why people get in unhealthy marriages, because they grew up in a lot of dysfunction, and maybe the chaos, the dysfunction, it feels comfortable to them, even though it's not really good for making a strong marriage. But they'll stay with it because they prefer the comfortable and the known versus the unknown. They get uncomfortable with somebody that, is well adjusted and could doesn't have a lot of chaos and could perform a good marriage, or be healthy that way. And they get into that, they get bored, they feel like, oh, I just don't know what to do with that. So we need more than human love to go the distance. That's why sometimes people say, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. Now, what does that mean? I always wondered about that. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. Well, the translation, I think, is simply this. It means, I care about you as a person, but I don't feel about you the way I used to feel about you. So I want to leave this relationship and I want to go find somebody who makes me feel the way I used to feel, because to me, that's love. It's the old Righteous Brothers song, you lost that loving feeling. And so people are always looking for that feeling, to get that feeling back again. But let me read you this definition of love. See what you think about it. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. Love is not arrogant or rude. Love does not seek its own way. Love is not irritable or resentful. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Now that's a definition from the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 6 to 8. That's a description of the love that God has for you and I. And, probably one of the best known verses in all the Bible is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. So that kind of love, in other words, if we want to go the distance, a lifetime, we need more than human love. So if we receive God's love into our life, then we're able to pass that on to my mate, and that kind of love will go the distance. That kind of love will be enough. Here's myth number 2. It shouldn't be this hard. Have you ever felt like that? Hey, if we're cut out for each other and we're really in love, why is it so hard to make a marriage work? And the truth is, marriage takes work. It's not like in the movies where, you're just riding off into the sunset and magically everything works out. You may think when you stand at the marriage altar and you say, I do, that, okay, it's done. But the reality is, it's never done. In other words, you have to keep working and nurturing the marriage. You have to keep dating each other for the rest of your life. Now, it shouldn't be a chore. It's the idea it's a labor of love. And you think about it. That's the way life is. Anything in life that's worthwhile, worth doing, give my energy to, it's going to take work. It's going to take hard work. If you wanted to be a great athlete, that's going to take work, even if you have a lot of talent. If you wanted to be healthy, that's going to take work and self-discipline and good habits and good character. These inner things that help me stay at whatever I'm trying to accomplish. When you look at successful people in life, they usually have strong character and good habits, a good moral compass, and they're willing to work hard. Nothing comes easy if it's really going to be something that's good. But we have to live intentionally, not just hoping everything turns out. The idea that, I've got to do my part. Sometimes we get frustrated and say, well, I can't get myself to do that. And so we're asking God. We hear that sometimes, let go and let God. But we have to understand there's a balance there. God gave me a brain. He gave me a body. So I have a responsibility. There's things that I have to do myself that God won't do for me. And those are the possible things and sometimes the very difficult things. Now, what God is able to do is the impossible things. So when I do my part, then I can trust God for the impossible things. You've heard that old expression that God helps those who help themselves. What I'm saying basically is, hey, as humans, we have to do our part, and then we can ask God to do his part. So the next time you're working on the marriage and you start complaining, it's so hard, stop and think and realize, hey, God's only expecting me to do the possible. I'm so glad he's not expecting me to do the impossible. So that I can leave off to God. Don't switch him up. Don't expect God to do your part, and don't try to do God's part, because you won't be able to do it. You and I can't do the impossible. So focus on what we can do. And, it doesn't matter who your parents were, what the background was. Maybe they had a bad marriage. Maybe it was total dysfunctional home. But remember, you're not your parents. In other words, you can do things different if you want to. Maybe they didn't teach you growing up and you didn't have a good model, but there's enough information out there where I can acquire the knowledge. You can Google anything today. And now we have AI. You can find out, how to be a good husband, how to be a good wife. And, I may have to change some things, but I can find out what to change and realize, hey, if I'll be intentional and I'll work hard, it can be a good marriage. Here's myth number 3. This is our last one for today. Maybe we just aren't right for each other. You ever heard somebody say that? They're having a lot of conflict and they're saying, maybe we're just not right for each other. Well, the truth is, some people aren't right for each other. They just aren't that compatible. They have these, what I call, deal breakers, and they're never going to change their mind on that. But that stuff we're supposed to find out before we get married. Those are the things we should talk about and see, hey, are there deal breakers? Deal breakers are things you absolutely positively cannot compromise on. Now, those are things that you'll die for. Those are things that you're not going to change, and maybe your mate is not going to change. It could be like children. One of you wants to have kids and the other one doesn't. Well, you can't compromise and have half a kid, and so you can't make somebody align with your deal breaker. So you find that out ahead of time, and that helps you see, okay, we're not a good match. So let's not get married, or we'll be fighting the rest of our marriage over these deal breakers. Now, maybe you're feeling and say, hey, I'm already past that. I'm married and I realize we have deal breakers. Yeah, you're right. Those are things we should have talked about before, but it's too late. I'm already, into it. So what do I do now? Well, now you realize you've got deal breakers, and kind of depends on what the deal breakers are. If you have a mate who's a serial adulterer, or they're an addict, or they're sexually or physically abusive, they're a criminal, they're a danger to you and a danger to the family, you're probably going to give an ultimatum. There's got to be a change or else. And if that gets ignored, then you're going to try to find a safe way to get out of the environment, and probably the marriage will end. Those are kind of the extreme cases. But a lot of times when people say this, maybe we're not right for each other, it's not about the deal breakers or the extreme things. It's about the normal differences that people have between genders, personality, family environment, background. So they have these different views, which is really going to be the case with anybody that you get with. And because of poor communication skills, because of emotional triggers, poor conflict resolution, they can't work through the problems and reach a compromise that they both can be all right with. Because a marriage is always going to require that. It's going to require change and compromise into what I call a win-win situation. And there's a couple other reasons that make it impossible for people to not work things out. And that's what I call just kind of core problems that fight against reality. And one of those is thinking that, okay, everything is my mate's fault. And basically I'm person. That's a pride problem. You know, the idea, I want my way, I want how I want it, when I want it, and I'm not going to change. And they're going to have to do the changing. So a marriage can never work with that kind of reality. You're going to have a high conflict marriage. You're going to be arguing all the time because the reality is both of you are going to have to change. And you can't get your way all the time. So two people are coming together into one, like one team. So it's never just about one person. It's both of you making some changes, you know, in those things. So it's giving up the pride, giving up the idea it's always got to be my way. You know, I remember years ago, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I was mad at my mom, and I said, I'm not going to talk to you the rest of my life. And I was standing at the front door, and I was pouting, and Mom said to me, you know, Johnny, you got to learn in life, you can't always get your own way. And that stuck with me. You know, it's parents say a lot of things to us. It's kind of funny sometimes what we remember and hang on to. But that always stuck with me. Yeah, I'm not always going to be able to get my own way. So if I can kind of learn these skills, you know, identify the myths, reject them, and go to the truth that is behind them, learn these things, accept these things, be willing to compromise, you know, be willing to change and realize I'm also going to end up happy on the other side. That's key to making a relationship work. So let me encourage you to realize, hey, some of these things that block having a good marriage, you can overcome them. You do your part, God will do his part. Now, next broadcast, we'll pick up here and I'll give you the final 4 myths that mess up people's marriages. Till then, you have a great time and God bless you. Bye now.